The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and the tension of countless gazes fixed on the imposing figure of the judge. His gavel struck sharply against the bench, silencing the whispers that had rippled through the gallery moments before. All eyes turned to the man on trial, a powerful, untouchable tycoon accused of orchestrating a web of corruption. The prosecutor's voice was steady as a metronome, unraveling an intricate tale of betrayal and greed. But none of that mattered now. "Objection!" the defense attorney barked, his voice cutting through the suffocating quiet. "This line of questioning is irrelevant," and the doors creaked open. Heads swiveled in unison toward the sound. A boy, no older than 12, stepped into the room. His clothes hung loose on his wiry frame, his face pale and smudged with dirt. His eyes, wide, hollow, and startlingly defiant, scanned the room as though searching for something or someone. The bailiff moved to intercept him, but the boy raised a trembling hand, his voice ringing out like a shot in the dead air. "Wait!" The word was like a stone dropped into a still pond, ripples of murmurs spreading across the courtroom. The judge's stern gaze settled on the boy. "This is highly irregular," he intoned, his voice an avalanche of authority. "Who are you, and what is the meaning of this interruption?" The boy didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his thin arms hanging stiffly by his sides. I've been starving for 3 days," he said, his voice hoarse but unwavering. "And I've come to tell you the truth." Gasps erupted from the gallery. Even the seasoned prosecutor faltered, his carefully rehearsed words dissolving in the face of this unexpected development. The judge raised a hand, and the courtroom fell silent once more. "Truth?" the judge asked, his tone skeptical yet curious. What truth could possibly justify this disruption? The boy swallowed hard, his gaze darting to the defendant. His lips trembled before the words spilled out, each syllable heavy with an urgency that cut through the stale air of formality. He told me I had to lie. He made me do it. But I can't anymore. I can't." A pin could have dropped, and it would have sounded like a cannon in the stunned silence that followed. The defendant's face, previously a mask of composed indifference, tightened visibly. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering furiously, while the prosecutor seized this moment to study the boy with razor-sharp intensity. "Step forward," the judge commanded, his voice softening only slightly. "Come closer, child. Let us understand what this is about." The boy hesitated, his small frame trembling as though weighed down by the enormity of what he was about to reveal. Finally, he moved, each step echoing in the courtroom like a drumbeat of destiny. The tension was unbearable. Whispers surged like an undertow in the gallery, speculation rippling from row to row. Who was this boy? What did he know? And most importantly, why had he chosen this moment, this courtroom, this trial, to reveal it? As the boy reached the front of the courtroom, he turned to face the judge. His lips parted to speak, but his voice failed him. Instead, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a crumpled piece of paper. The room collectively held its breath as he extended it toward the bench. The judge took the paper, his stern features softening for the briefest of moments as he glanced at the trembling boy. His eyes scanned the note, and his expression darkened like a storm gathering on the horizon. "This," the judge said, lifting the note, "changes everything." The gavel struck the bench, and the courtroom erupted into chaos. The boy's name was Sam, a name as simple and unassuming as the life he had once known. A life that, in his 12 short years, had unraveled into threads too thin to hold together. Sam's world was one of forgotten corners and dark alleys, of empty cupboards and makeshift beds. He was a shadow in a city that had long since stopped noticing the invisible lives of its most vulnerable. For months, he had survived on scraps, learning to shrink into the spaces between wealth and indifference. He had once known the comfort of family, of laughter echoing through a modest but warm home. But that was before the fire, before the debt collectors came, dragging away what little his family had left. His father had vanished under the weight of despair, and his mother, once fierce and protective, had succumbed to an illness no doctor would treat without payment. And so, Sam had become a ghost, a boy wandering the fringes of a city so gilded in parts that its shine blinded him, yet so cold in others that even the stars seemed to withhold their light. In the heart of the city stood a sprawling mansion, its facade gleaming like a monument to excess. Here lived Richard Kane, the man now seated in the defendant's chair in the courtroom. Kane was a titan of industry, a name synonymous with power and ruthlessness. His wealth was old, built on generations of calculated risk and unapologetic ambition. But Richard Kane was not untouchable. Beneath the polished veneer of his public persona lay cracks. dangerous, jagged fissures that whispered of secrets too explosive to remain buried. Those close to him spoke of a man haunted by shadows, a restless tycoon who often retreated to his study late at night, poring over ledgers and documents with the intensity of someone desperately seeking to control a storm. It was not guilt that drove Kane's obsession. Guilt was a luxury he refused to indulge. Instead, it was fear. Fear that the web he had spun to protect his empire might finally unravel. Fear that the one person who could destroy him had already slipped through his grasp. Sam had met Kane by accident, or so he had believed at the time. The memory was sharp, each detail etched into his mind like an indelible scar. It had been a cold night, the kind that made the city's steel and glass feel hostile. Sam had been rummaging through a dumpster outside a high-end restaurant, pulling out half-eaten meals wrapped in wax paper. That was when he felt it, a hand clamping down on his shoulder. His first instinct had been to run, but the grip was firm, unyielding. "Don't scream," the man had said, his voice smooth yet chilling. "I'm not here to hurt you." Sam had turned to see a sharply dressed man with piercing eyes and an air of quiet menace. It was Richard Kane. At the time, Sam hadn't known who he was, only that he exuded a power that made Sam's stomach twist with both fear and curiosity. "What's your name?" Kane had asked, his tone unervingly calm. "Sam," he had answered, his voice trembling. Kane had smiled, a thin, calculated smile. "I have a proposition for you, Sam." That night, Kane had taken Sam to his mansion. Not out of kindness, but because he needed a pawn. Kane had discovered that Sam was a drifter, unnoticed by the city's eyes, with no ties that anyone would miss. He had given the boy food, clothes, and a warm bed for the first time in months. But the price was steep. "I need you to do something for me," Kane had said, his voice like a silk thread pulling taut. "Just a small favor. You'll be helping me and yourself." The favor had seemed harmless at first. Sam had been asked to deliver envelopes, pick up packages, memorize names. Kane had taught him how to blend in, how to move unnoticed. But as the weeks passed, the tasks became darker, murkier. Sam had started to sense that the man who had taken him in was not a savior, but a puppeteer. The turning point came when Kane handed Sam a script. "This is important," Kane had said, crouching to meet the boy's gaze. His eyes bored into Sam's, cold and unyielding. "You'll say exactly this when the time comes. Nothing more, nothing less." Sam had nodded, too frightened to refuse. But the weight of the words he had been asked to memorize hung over him like a curse. Kane had brought Sam to the courtroom under the guise of protecting him. But Sam now understood that he was a pawn in a larger game, one that could destroy lives. Sitting in the gallery, watching the trial unfold, Sam felt the chains of guilt tighten around him. He was meant to be Kane's weapon, his insurance against the truth. But the boy's conscience, battered but not broken, refused to comply. Sam's struggles weren't limited to survival anymore. They were a battle between fear and courage, between self-preservation and doing what was right. Every stolen glance at Kane's stony expression reminded him of the consequences of betrayal. Yet every word uttered in the courtroom reminded him of the stakes. Kane's trial was not just about money laundering and corruption. It was about lives ruined, manipulated, discarded. Sam had heard whispers among the staff in Kane's mansion, fragments of stories about people who had disappeared after crossing him. He had seen the desperation in the eyes of men and women who had come to Kane's door, only to leave broken and defeated. Now, as he stood in the courtroom, Sam realized that he held the key to unraveling everything. The note he had handed to the judge was just the beginning. It contained a single name, a name Kane had ordered Sam to memorize, but one Sam couldn't bring himself to utter. Sam had written it down instead, trembling as he scrawled the letters that would set the stage for the storm to come. That Sam's arrival in the courtroom was no accident. He had been watching from the shadows, waiting for the moment when Kane's carefully constructed facade would crack. What he hadn't anticipated was the weight of standing under the spotlight, of feeling every eye in the room on him as he tried to do what no one else had dared: speak the truth. But Kane wasn't a man who left loose ends. And as the boy stood before the judge, trembling but resolute, Kane's cold gaze was locked on him, calculating his next move. Because Kane knew something Sam didn't. The boy's truth was only one piece of a far more dangerous puzzle, and Kane had no intention of letting the pieces fall into place. The courtroom buzzed with restless energy after Sam's explosive interruption. The judge's gaze shifted back and forth between the crumpled note in his hand and the defendant. Richard Kane sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Yet beneath his calm exterior, his mind was spinning, calculating the extent of the boy's betrayal. The prosecutor seized the moment, stepping forward with the confidence of someone who knew the tide had shifted. "Your Honor," This development is highly unusual but deeply relevant. I request a recess to interview the witness and examine the evidence. Kane's attorney objected immediately, his voice sharp and biting. Your Honor, this is an obvious attempt to derail these proceedings. The credibility of this child must be questioned. The judge silenced the exchange with a sharp rap of his gavel. Enough. The court will recess for 30 minutes to determine the admissibility of this new evidence. As the room emptied, Kane's icy glare followed Sam, who was led into a side chamber by the prosecutor and a bailiff. The boy's small frame seemed to shrink further under the weight of the moment. His courage had carried him this far, but the battle was only beginning. In the secluded chamber, the prosecutor leaned in, speaking gently but urgently. Sam, you've done something incredibly brave, but we need to know everything. What's in that note, and why did you bring it here? Sam's eyes darted nervously toward the door. The memory of Kane's warning was fresh in his mind. If you cross me, Kane had whispered once, his voice as smooth and sharp as glass, you won't have anything left to lose. The boy hesitated, then whispered, the note. It's a name, someone he hurt, someone who can prove what he did. The prosecutor's brow furrowed. Who? Sam swallowed hard. Lila Carson. She worked for him. She knew everything about his deals, his secrets, but he made her disappear. I don't know if she's still alive. The prosecutor stiffened. Lila Carson was a name buried deep in the investigation's files. A loose thread they hadn't been able to pull. This revelation shifted the entire case. If Sam was telling the truth, they had more than Kane's financial crimes. They had proof of silenced witnesses and potentially worse. Sam, the prosecutor said firmly, we need to find her. Do you know where she might be? Sam's lips quivered. I think I do, but it's dangerous. Kane, he'll know. While Sam spilled his truth, Kane was busy planning his next move. In the privacy of a dimly lit holding room, his attorney hissed. We didn't anticipate this. That boy, what does he know? Kane's expression remained calm, but his eyes were deadly. He knows just enough to cause trouble, but he's also scared. Fear is a powerful leash. The attorney leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. The name he gave, it's Lila, isn't it? Kane smirked, a chilling expression devoid of warmth. Of course, but they won't find her. Not alive, anyway. The lawyer flinched but said nothing. He knew better than to question his employer's methods. We need to discredit the boy before this goes further. Make him look unreliable. Kane leaned back, his composure unsettling. Don't worry, the seeds of doubt are already sown. People love a tragic story, but they trust power. As the courtroom reconvened, the judge allowed Sam to take the stand under strict conditions. The defense pounced immediately, pressing the boy with calculated precision. Sam, Kane's attorney began, his tone honeyed but dripping with menace. You've had a hard life, haven't you? Sam nodded hesitantly, feeling the trap tighten around him. And Mr. Kane helped you, didn't he? Took you off the streets? Gave you food? Shelter? Clothing? Yes, Sam admitted, his voice barely audible. The attorney turned to the jury, his hands spread wide. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a boy who was given a lifeline by a generous man. Is it any wonder he might feel pressure to repay that kindness? Perhaps he's confused about what's true and what isn't. The defense's words began to sway the room. Sam could feel the doubt seeping into the air like a slow poison. His gaze flickered to Kane, whose expression remained disturbingly neutral, as though he were watching a chess game unfold. Then, the prosecutor stood, his voice slicing through the room. Objection, Your Honor. This line of questioning is speculative and irrelevant. The judge nodded. Sustained. Counselor, stick to the facts. But the damage was done. Sam's credibility had taken a hit, and Kane's team knew it. The boy's hands clenched the edge of the stand, his knuckles white. He had to push through the fear, the doubt, the whispers. He had to find his voice again. The prosecutor pivoted, steering the questioning toward the heart of Sam's story. Sam, the note you gave the court, it mentions Lila Carson. Tell us about her. Sam's voice wavered. She worked for him. She knew everything. I heard them talking one night. She said she was going to tell the police about what he was doing. And then, she was gone. The courtroom erupted into murmurs, the tension crackling like a live wire. The prosecutor pressed further. And do you know what happened to her? Sam hesitated, his stomach churning with the weight of the truth. No, but I heard him say something. He said, she wouldn't be a problem anymore. Gasps rippled through the room. The prosecutor turned to the jury. This is a boy with no reason to lie. A boy who risked everything to stand here today. Kane's attorney stood abruptly. Enough. This is hearsay, conjecture at best. We demand concrete evidence, not the words of a frightened child. The judge's gavel slammed down. Order. This court will review the claims and evidence in due process. But Kane wasn't waiting for the system to play out. He leaned toward his attorney and whispered, activate contingency plans. If Lila's alive, find her before they do. That night, as the courtroom emptied, the prosecutor received an anonymous tip, a location, scrawled hastily on a slip of paper. It was a derelict warehouse on the edge of the city, a place Sam vaguely remembered from the nights Kane had sent him on errands. With little time to lose, the prosecutor and a small team moved swiftly. They arrived at the warehouse under the cover of darkness, flashlights cutting through the shadows. The air was thick with dust and decay, the silence broken only by the creak of rusted metal. And then they found her. Lila Carson was alive, but barely. She was huddled in a corner, her once vibrant demeanor reduced to a shell of its former self. Her eyes widened in fear as the team approached, but when Sam stepped forward, her expression softened. You're the boy, she whispered. Her voice cracked but filled with recognition. Lila's survival was the linchpin the prosecution needed. But as they led her out of the warehouse, headlights pierced the darkness. A black SUV skidded to a halt, and men in suits emerged, their intent clear. Kane's reach was longer than they had anticipated. The warehouse erupted into chaos. The prosecutor shielded Lila while Sam froze, paralyzed by the sudden violence. Kane's men advanced, their movements swift and coordinated, until a single shout rang out. Stop! Sam stepped forward, his small figure silhouetted against the glaring headlights. His voice was steady, defiant. You can't stop the truth. Not anymore. The moment hung in the air, taut with tension, before the sound of sirens shattered the standoff. Police cars swarmed the area, forcing Kane's men to retreat. But as they sped away, one thing was clear. Kane wouldn't go down without a fight. The prosecutor turned to Lila and Sam. This is only the beginning. The real battle starts now. And as the sirens faded into the night, the boy who had been invisible found himself at the center of a storm far greater than he could have imagined. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Lila Carson had been brought in under heavy police escort, her frail figure a stark contrast to the poised confidence of Richard Kane. Cameras flashed outside, reporters clamoring for a glimpse of the woman whose testimony could shatter the empire of one of the city's most powerful men. Sam sat in the gallery, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. He had played his part, but the storm that followed had grown far beyond him. Now he watched as the weight of the truth teetered on the edge of revelation. Ms. Carson? The prosecutor began, his tone solemn. Can you tell the court why you disappeared? Lila's voice was quiet but steady, cutting through the courtroom like a knife. Because I was afraid. Richard Kane threatened my life when I told him I couldn't keep covering for him. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Kane's attorney rose immediately. Objection, Your Honor. Speculative and unsubstantiated. The judge waved him down. Overruled. Continue. Lila hesitated, her gaze flitting to Kane. He stared back, his face a mask of calm, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the table. I was his financial officer, Lila continued, her voice trembling now. I saw everything, the accounts, the shell companies, the bribes. He was siphoning money into offshore accounts, laundering it through charities, and silencing anyone who got too close. The prosecutor leaned in. And did you ever confront him about this? Yes, Lila said, her voice breaking. I told him I couldn't be part of it anymore. That's when he said I wouldn't be a problem much longer. The silence that followed was deafening. Just as the prosecutor prepared to press further, the courtroom doors creaked open. A man in a crisp suit strode in, his presence commanding attention. He handed a folder to the judge and whispered something inaudible. The judge frowned, then adjusted his glasses to read the document. The atmosphere shifted, a palpable tension spreading through the room. Counselors, approach the bench, the judge said gravely. The attorneys gathered, whispering furiously as the judge shared the contents of the document. Kane's attorney's face turned ashen, while the prosecutor's eyes gleamed with a mix of surprise and satisfaction. The judge turned to the court. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have new evidence that must be addressed immediately. Bailiff, bring the boy to the stand. Sam's heart sank. He hadn't expected to testify again. As he walked to the stand, his legs felt like lead, his mind racing with questions. What was in the folder? The prosecutor began gently. Sam, I need you to think very carefully. When you worked for Mr. Kane, Did you ever hear the name Martin Hall? Sam frowned, the name unfamiliar. No, I don't think so. The prosecutor pressed on. Are you sure? Think back to the nights you delivered packages. Did anyone ever mention him? Sam hesitated, a flicker of memory surfacing. There was one time. A man at the docks. He said something about the Hall project. I didn't know what it meant. The prosecutor's expression tightened. Sam, Martin Hall was the investigator who vanished while looking into Kane's finances. His disappearance was linked to the same shell companies you delivered for. Sam's stomach twisted. He hadn't realized how deeply he was entangled in Kane's web. And there's more, the prosecutor said, turning to the judge. The document presented today contains records retrieved from Martin Hall's hidden files. It includes audio recordings, conversations between Kane and his associates discussing Hall's disappearance and Lila Carson's silencing. The courtroom froze as the prosecutor held up a thumb drive. Your Honor, I request permission to play a recording. The judge nodded solemnly. Proceed. The room was silent as the audio crackled to life. Kane's unmistakable voice echoed through the speakers. We have to act quickly, he said. Hall's getting too close. Take care of it. I don't care how. Another voice chimed in, low and gravelly. And the woman? Carson. Kane's reply was cold, clinical. She's a loose end. Make sure she doesn't talk. The recording ended, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. Kane's attorney jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this recording is inadmissible. The judge cut him off. Sit down, counselor. Lila's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. But it was Sam who broke the silence, his voice trembling but insistent. That wasn't all of it. The prosecutor turned to him. What do you mean? Sam's face was pale, but his gaze was steady. There's another recording. I heard it once. When I was hiding in Kane's office. It was him and someone else talking about a fire. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The prosecutor and the judge exchanged a look before calling for order. What fire, Sam? The prosecutor asked, his voice urgent. Sam hesitated, the memory clawing at him. The fire that killed my family. Gasps rippled through the room. Sam's eyes brimmed with tears as he turned to Kane. You said it was an accident. But it wasn't, was it? You did it. You burned it all to hide something. Kane's mask of composure finally cracked. His attorney leaned over, whispering furiously, but Kane didn't respond. His gaze was fixed on Sam, a flicker of something, anger, regret, flashing in his eyes. The prosecutor quickly pieced it together. Your Honor, I request an immediate investigation into this fire. If Sam's claims are true, it could prove a pattern of destruction and silencing tied directly to the defendant. The judge nodded gravely. Granted. Bailiff, detain the defendant for further questioning. Kane stood abruptly, his calm unraveling into a visible fury. This is absurd. You're all being manipulated by a child. But the weight of the evidence was undeniable. As the bailiff approached, Kane's facade crumbled. He turned to Sam, his voice low but venomous. You don't know what you've done. Sam met his gaze, his small frame trembling but unyielding. I've told the truth. As Kane was led away, the courtroom buzzed with speculation. The boy who had started as a ghost had become a beacon of truth, exposing a man who had believed himself untouchable. But the revelations left unanswered questions. Who else was involved in Kane's web of corruption? Was Martin Hall truly gone? Or was there more to his disappearance? And could Sam ever find peace after uncovering such devastating truths? The battle was far from over, but for the first time, the scales seemed to tip toward justice. Richard Kane, the man who once seemed untouchable, now sat in the back of a police van, his hands shackled and his empire in ruins. The evidence uncovered by Sam, Lila Carson, and the prosecutor had torn through the fortress of lies Kane had built over decades. Investigations into the fire that killed Sam's family revealed the dark truth. It had been arson, orchestrated to destroy incriminating documents housed in the modest building next door. Kane's guilt was undeniable, and the trial that followed was swift and merciless. The jury's verdict, guilty on all counts, brought tears of relief to Lila's eyes and a small, bittersweet smile to Sam's face. Justice, long overdue, had finally been served. For Sam, the end of the trial marked the beginning of a new chapter. The boy who had once been invisible now stood tall, his courage and resilience earning him the respect and admiration of many. Lila, determined to atone for her silence, took Sam in, giving him the home and family he had lost. But the scars of his past did not fade easily. Sam often found himself staring out of his new bedroom window, haunted by memories of the fire and the faces of his parents. Lila, understanding his pain, offered gentle guidance, helping him find solace in small moments of peace and joy. One evening, Sam sat with Lila, a quiet question hanging in the air. "Do you think they'd be proud of me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lila placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I know they would be," she said. "You were brave enough to do what so many couldn't. You gave their loss meaning." Lila, too, found redemption in the aftermath of the trial. Speaking out against Cain had freed her from years of fear and guilt, allowing her to rebuild her life. She used her expertise to assist in ongoing investigations into Cain's network, ensuring that others who had suffered under his corruption would see justice. But more than that, she became a symbol of resilience for those who had been silenced, proving that even in the face of overwhelming power, it was never too late to do the right thing. In a quiet moment, Sam and Lila visited the cemetery where his parents were buried. Sam placed a small bouquet of wildflowers on their grave, his heart heavy but filled with a newfound sense of purpose. "I couldn't save you," he whispered, "but I'll make sure no one else gets hurt the way we did." The events that unfolded served as a powerful reminder of the fragility of truth and the strength required to protect it. Sam's story resonated far beyond the courtroom, inspiring others to speak out against injustice, no matter how daunting the opposition. The moral of the tale was clear. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the strength to act despite it. Truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of rising to the surface when guided by those brave enough to uncover it. As Sam and Lila walked away from the gravesite, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the headstones. For the first time in years, Sam felt something akin to hope. His journey was far from over, but he knew he wouldn't face it alone. The courtroom that had once been filled with secrets and lies was now a testament to the power of justice, reminding everyone who entered it that even the smallest voices could bring down the mightiest walls. And so, the story of the boy who dared to speak ended not with silence, but with the echoes of truth resounding far and wide.